Hello, welcome to the Healthy Alternatives podcast. I am Dr. Christine Sauer with DocChristine.com. Today's show is a recording of my radio show of the same name. Enjoy! Good afternoon, this is Dr. Christine Sauer, your host of the show Healthy Alternatives here on 97.5 CIOE FM with live stream on communityradio.ca every Thursday at 12 noon Atlantic Standard Time. Thanks for tuning in today. In this show, I will talk mostly with guests about all aspects of health, healthcare and wellness, from conventional to alternative and everything in between. My mission for this radio show is to help change people's lives for the better by informing them about different options to get and stay healthy and well so they can choose for themselves which option might work in their case. And if you feel you're stuck in a dark place, I want to tell you there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Today I am pleased to be with Roxanne, my friend and author, and of life planner and independent funeral celebrant, and a lover of life. Now, Roxanne, I'm happy to have you today.
Thank you, Christine. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, let me know, you're relatively young. I mean, you're not in the process of dying yet. I hope, well, we are all in the process of dying. How in the heck did you go into the death business?
Well, I was in a car accident in 2006, and I was a holistic practitioner at the time of massage therapy and an aquatic therapy. And so I got a spinal cord injury and I wasn't able to go back to doing that work. And it's been a very long recovery. And during that time, my mother died, and my mother died with an intestacy, which means that she died without a proper will. And so she died here in Nova Scotia. And so I had to come back and start dealing with that and trying to settle that. And I ended up deciding to move here. And then once I got here, I did one of those occupational assessments to see what I might be able to do because I needed to recreate my life. And funeral director popped out. And I thought, wow, I've seen that many times in the past, and decided that maybe I should pursue that, which gave me the opportunity to observe in a funeral home for a week. And I was so comfortable with that, and looked back over my life and saw all of these other signposts that were actually pointing me in this direction. And so, my mom died with an intestacy. If she would have spent $250 or whatever to write a proper will, it wouldn't have cost her estate over $16,000 and counting to resolve this matter. And she died in 2011. And it took until last year to get this matter before the court to try and get it resolved.
Now, to go to the health part, I know that is not the main reason you choose to become an independent funeral celebrant, which is really part of what you do is to plan your death ahead of time so that it will be a good transition, not just for your relatives financially, but also for yourself. And part of this is what I do too, is to help people live healthy until they die. And I think it's important to plan your health and plan your death, because if you don't plan a good death, you can't have a good life, isn't it?
I absolutely agree with you. And that's what was the inspiration for me writing the books, Planning for a Good Death, the User's Guide and Workbook. It's 16 modules, and, there's 3 sections to it. The first one is just a bunch of lists and details that everybody needs to pull together, so it makes that easier for when you do die, and for the people that need to, file your paperwork and do all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But part 2 of the section of the books is a very self-reflective process, and it's getting in touch with the meaning of one's life, because in my research, I found out that people often wrestle in the active stage of dying with whether or not their life had any meaning. And that, to me, is a really interesting time to be wrestling with that. I think in order to really embrace life and be fully living it, we need to get in touch with that well before we're dying, and so that we can embrace life and live it to the fullest. And
I understand where you come from. I worked with dying people at the VG2 here, and nobody says, I wished I worked harder. And it is kind of too late when you're on your deathbed to reflect and say, all my life I climbed that mountain. I'm up there looking down. I climbed the wrong mountain.
Right.
And that's regret, and nobody wants to have regret. And it's good what you do to help them plan.
Exactly. And in the planning and reflecting on so many of the elements related to it, whether that's your bucket list, whether that's the heart letters, the communications you want to be able to express to the people who have loved you and been on your life's journey with. I think those are very important things to identify early on, and so that you can clear up any regrets, so that if there is something that's kind of niggling at you, that you can do something about it instead of taking all of that with you as almost baggage in a way through the process of death. When you're dying, there's so many other things going on. It's like easing the burden for yourself and also easing that for the people that are with you during that time.
Really, the earlier somebody plans for their death in a way, or their life, the better it is. Because many people go through life, and you've seen it probably all the time, and look at their life, and they go from day to day, paycheck to paycheck, sit at the TV at night, watch something nonsense, and never have an idea why they're on this earth.
Yes, it seems to be the case for many people that happens. And and I think all the while they feel this place maybe inside, but they don't know how to address it. And so that's why it's really important to self-reflect. And of course, if you think about it, we spend more time planning for a wedding or for Christmas dinner than we do for end of life, yet everybody is going to die. So there's no, you don't have to wait till terminal diagnosis to do this work. You can start today.
When you talk to people, do you find that many people feel like, I really want to leave a legacy, something that I can be remembered as somebody that I want to my relatives to look back and say, oh yes, my grandma, she was so-and-so.
Well, I think some people are a little bit shy to maybe name how they want to be remembered because, we're not encouraged in our culture to really celebrate who we are. And that's what I love about the middle section of these books is that exploration of being able to admit that to ourselves, number one, and then decide what we want to share with somebody else about how we want to be remembered. And I think that's a really important part.
Yeah.
It's part of self-love and self-forgiveness if there's anything that's niggling there.
So what exactly do you do? Say I hire you as a death planner. What would you lead me through? What process would you lead me through?
Well, I would generally want to encourage you to pick up the books, and they're still on sale for $19.99 until the end of March. And it's very in-depth, step-by-step comprehensive program, including a budgeting module, so that you can also plan for how, the expenses will go. And so what I would do then is when somebody's really ready to do that planning, of course, doing that with me is going to bring up unique and individual questions that a person may have, because we're all unique and we're all so different.
Certainly.
And so part of the planning process is, trying to get in touch with, well, okay, so this is, the body disposition method you want. And there's so many options. Like people really need to get out of the box in their thinking because there's so many different ways now, instead of just going through a funeral home or having a religious ceremony, if that's not what you really want to have. So green burial is an option, and people are interested in, what is that? It's definitely more environmentally friendly. So I would have discussions around that. And I'm not particularly attached to any way that you might want to do that for you, because I'm here to encourage you to get your need met and facilitate conversations with your family members if you want that as well. So I'll help draw out some of the things that might be more difficult to talk about. And because I have experience facilitating healing, I just hold really sacred space and respectful space for the journey, because sometimes it can be emotional for people.
It certainly can. So at what stage of life do people typically come to you or pick up your book? And
Well, I'm starting to see it, like I was just, for instance, on the Sick Boy podcast recently, and it's a younger demographic, and I was really surprised at how many people got in contact with me after that. So it just really varies, and ultimately, I think what it is the people who really get it, that they need to do some planning in advance, or they want to know how to have those conversations or how to start them. And often, people will say to me, oh, my mom is a baby boomer and, is 80 years old and won't talk to me about this. And then I'll say, well, did you do your planning? And they go, no. And I said, well, nobody wants to be told what to do. So maybe you need to start with yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's a good thing. It's a good thing. Everybody should really start as early as possible.
Exactly, because we're all going to die. It shouldn't come as a surprise, really. And
it's quite interesting. Always, myself, I was depressed even as a child and always thinking of suicide. So the topic of death was quite familiar. And I remember when we were in medical school in the first year, there was a course offered, planning your death, basically. And we all wrote our obituary, and it was quite interesting. And I think they should do that here too.
Absolutely. And certainly by going through the self-reflective process in part 2 of the books, you get in touch with your personal history and some of those things. And then it makes it easier to be able to write the obituary, or at least give some clues about who you want to write that for you and what you want them to write about you based on your values and what's been important to you and the important people in your life. And, so often I see obituaries written in the paper and they just look like a cookie cutter, and it's like it doesn't really tell anything about you. And there's so much to know. I've heard so many times at funerals how people have come and said, wow, I came here because I learned something about this person that I've known for 20 years and never knew this about them. And I'm so glad that I know that about them now. And it's like, well, why are we waiting for that? We could have a living funeral and talk about all those things.
Well, that is an interesting idea, a living funeral. What do you do at a living funeral?
Well, that's where if you know you have a terminal diagnosis, or you may be choosing MAID, medical assistance in dying, as a way to exit. You can invite all your friends and share the love. Tell them how much you appreciate them and what a difference they've made in your life, and then be open to receiving that kind of feedback back. And I think that that's just such an amazing healing experience to be able to share in an authentic way from our hearts with each other and have those opportunities, because I think we don't have them often enough.
I think that is a very great idea, and maybe even if we don't have a terminal diagnosis, we should consider doing something like that, even if we call it a celebration of life.
Certainly.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's a nice thought to end up the first part of the broadcast and go to the break. And here on 97.5 CRE FM. And please tune in after the commercial break for more with Roxanne Welch about an interesting topic, how to celebrate life and death. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to Healthy Alternatives here on 97.5 CIOE FM or on the web at communityradio.ca. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Sauer, and I'm with today's guest, Roxanne Welch, funeral planner, independent celebrant, end of life planner. What a profession. Thanks for having us back. And it was a pleasure to talk in the first half a little bit about what you do. And tell us a little bit more. I know people grieve differently. And even if you lose a pet, we lost our dog today. It is a process of grief you go through if you spend your life with somebody for some time, if it's a dog, cat, or person. Of course, it's worse when it's a person, especially as a child. And I like the idea very much that you purport to plan for it and then celebrate. Tell us a little bit about that.
About how we celebrate?
How you celebrate life in death.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, it's an individual journey, right? How we are impacted by one person's death or one pet's death could be different than the next person or the next pet, because everybody is so unique and different, and our relationship with each other is so unique and different. Mm-hmm. And so I think too, it's also really important to give ourselves that time and space to be able to feel all of our feelings around grief. Mm-hmm. My cat died in November. It was November. Mm-hmm. And my dad died in September of last year. And both very different events and both very different kinds of relationships. And I found that for me, because what happens physiologically is that we move into the limbic system when there's a death, because we're shocked and, we're emotional. And that's why it's hard to make really good decisions when you are trying to make plans after somebody's died. Better to do it ahead of time. But anyway, it's a very real experience. And it's hard to kind of have a grasp because we're not in our frontal cortex thinking logically. And so it's what I found in my journey was to just be really, really present with the feelings that were coming up, not try to stuff them away or try to make them go away or deny them or ignore them, but just to be really present with them and go deeply into them. And I found that if I got into a situation where I wanted to try and ignore them, it took a lot more of my life force energy to try and resist that than it did to actually just be sit and be present with that and go through the experience and then come out on the other side feeling lighter and uplifted and feeling a deeper bond or connection with that person or that pet, after the experience of going through it.
Yeah, and that probably depends a lot on what you believe. I mean, there's different ways to perceive death in different cultures. And I know you have some experience. You told me a little bit about it. I can tell from the German way to celebrate or do a funeral, it is very different from here. There is no viewings because in Germany it's not legal to put a body, embalm them for environmental reasons, because in Germany they have less space, so a grave is only good for 20 years. And if you want to keep it, your relatives have to pay again to keep it. And if there's not enough relatives interested, well, you just get put out of the grave and somebody else gets it. So that's very efficient, but some people find it weird. But as weird as I found it to see an embalmed person all made up to look nice in a way, to look at in the funeral home. So what's your experience with the different cultures about?
Well, certainly there's a death cafe in Halifax, and it's run by a couple of Buddhist women. And when I first started to attend there, I started to understand more about the Buddhist experience with embracing their mortality. And it's a daily contemplation that they have. It's because the more we think about our death, the more we embrace life. And so it was very fascinating. And yes, there's different religious experiences, and I couldn't go through them all right now. But even when you look back to First Nations culture,
fascinating.
It's very fascinating because before colonization, before we, invented this new way of doing death, they would allow for 4 days for the body to go through the process of unwinding the soul or spirit from the body. And that's their belief. And they believe in the 4 directions: mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. So it's this fuller process. Now, you mentioned an interesting thing about the embalming part. Embalming is not a legal requirement. And it's legal in Nova Scotia and in most jurisdictions for families to act as their own funeral director and to transport the body. Wow. So that opens up a whole lot of options. And, it's the way we used to do death before the invention of embalming. And, I've heard many stories of how, grandma was laid out in the parlor and everybody gathered around and celebrated. And grandma wasn't embalmed. There was probably ice packs around, or they cooled the room to make it, so that the body doesn't break down as fast because it starts decomposing right away. But there's ways to manage that, and certainly modern technology to be able to manage that. So it's quite possible to still have a viewing, but we don't need embalming, and it's a carcinogen anyway.
And really, when you see what embalming does, and right now there's an exhibition at the Museum of History, those are embalmed bodies, really. They never decay.
Are you talking about the Body Worlds exhibit? Actually, it's a form of plastination, and they've plasticized all of those parts. And that's a fascinating process.
Yeah. But the embalming is the first step of it.
Oh, okay.
And then you fill the vessels with plasticine to make them look good. Because I remember when I was in medical school and we dissected bodies that were embalmed, basically. It's the only way to get it done in Germany.
Yes.
That's how they looked without the vessels nicely looking.
Yes.
So it's quite interesting to realize that, I don't know, why would you want to be embalmed? I don't understand it. But people have their own beliefs and their own right to it. But
there's certainly that aspect, and it's also profitable for the funeral industry as well, and that's just the truth of it.
And certainly many funeral homes are all about being profitable, and there's sometimes practices, and probably we've seen it on Marketplace and other TV shows, how they take advantage of grieving people where people have not prepared their funeral or the life for the. So that's interesting.
And not all funeral directors are like that, right?
No.
But there are a number of them, and we're hearing more and more stories about that.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, it's important to plan ahead, because as I was explaining earlier, when you're in the limbic system, you're not thinking clearly, and it is easy because you are sitting across from a salesperson, and it is easy to overspend at that time because you're not thinking clearly. And to be fair, these people work for corporations mostly. Nowadays, not very many independent funeral homes left. They're trying to feed their family, and they're doing their job.
Certainly, as every salesperson does. And sometimes I think it's really a good idea to plan ahead, plan your health before your funeral. That's always what I say. But it's important to also plan for your funeral. And even the old Romans knew that, memento mori, remember that you'll die. Because as you said with the Buddhists, you should really every day think, okay, if I die tomorrow, can I look back, be happy, and say, okay, I did what I wanted to do. And many people can't do that. They say, oh, no, I'm not done. I have to do so much more. I have to do this and that. I feel regret that I didn't apologize for this. And that is sad when they then actually die and unfinished.
Yes. And, as much as we like to embrace our health and do everything possible to live a long, good life, we're going to die. And sometimes we die for reasons that have nothing to do with old age.
Sure.
And I was just looking at the statistics today. There 26 people on average die each day in Nova Scotia.
I feel really that even the suicide in young people, some could be prevented if death would be more openly talked about and accepted. Yes, you will die, but you nearly need to be grateful for this moment that you still have. You're not dead yet, but you will die. But if you're not looking after yourself today, and you will die a miserable death, and you will be unhappy before you die.
I agree. And I think that we could also add to that conversation that, we seem so reluctant in our culture to allow space for people to be emotional and to experience that part of our lives. As I was saying, in First Nations culture, they acknowledged that we have an emotional body. And I really think that sometimes when we don't allow, especially men and boys, to be real and authentic with their emotions, that creates a toxic buildup of emotions that they don't know what to do with, and they don't know where to go to get support to be able to release that out of them. And sometimes it just caves in on them, and they don't know what else to do. And statistically speaking, there's a higher number of men and boys that commit suicide than women do, and they also are more violent in their approach.
That's why they commit the suicide instead of just trying it.
Right,
so true.
And we're trying to change the language around that. And if I missed that, it's death by suicide or dying by suicide is more politically correct now.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yes,
and really, we come back to the aspect that we should celebrate our life to prepare for death. And this brings me to the end of today's show. Please don't hesitate to contact me with any questions, thoughts, comments, or suggestion, or if you'd like to contact Roxanne. My email here is Christine, CHRISTINE, @communityradio.ca, and I'm always grateful for any feedback. I also wanted to extend a special thank you to today's producer, Jim Francis. Thanks, Roxanne. And what was your name of the book again?
It's Planning for a Good Death, and you can download that at www.roxannewalsh.ca/book.
Definitely worth doing. Thank you all for listening to Healthy Alternatives. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Sauer. Tune in next Thursday at noon on 97.5 CIOE FM Community Radio with live stream on communityradio.ca for the next episode. Goodbye and have a great day.